They poisoned my mother's oxygen supply, thinking I'd just take it quietly. But I don't play fair, and I don't forget. What would you do if the people meant to protect your neighborhood nearly killed your family because they didn't like how she breathed? Welcome to my channel. If you love wild HOA revenge stories, hit subscribe and let's get started. My mother's lungs had been failing her for the last 3 years. Idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, a progressive disease with no cure, only management. Every breath she took required effort. And the oxygen tank she used in our living room wasn't just a machine. It was her lifeline. She was a proud woman. Once a librarian who could walk 3 miles a day, now confined to a recliner and a soft blanket. Her tubing hissing softly as the compressor pushed air into her lungs. We lived in the Birchwood Trails subdivision, a gated HOA community where uniformity was worshipped like religion. I bought the home because it was close to her specialists in the hospital, not because I gave a damn about decorative mailboxes or whether my lawn stripes were angled correctly. For the first few months, no one said anything. Then Karen, the HOA president, came knocking. A trim woman with a fake smile and real venom behind her eyes. She asked if we might consider moving the oxygen compressor inside a closet or garage. It's a bit of an eyesore, and the noise can be heard from the sidewalk. I stared at her. It's medical equipment. She can't breathe without it. Karen tilted her head like I had misunderstood her suggestion. Of course. We just ask all residents to be mindful of the neighborhood's visual harmony. I shut the door without another word. A week later, we got our first violation notice. $100 for visual obstruction caused by unapproved medical equipment. 2 days after that, another $150 for external noise pollution exceeding 40 decibels, referring to the low hum of the oxygen machine that had never even set off a car alarm. The fine stacked up faster than I could file appeals. Karen and her goons on the board began photographing our house daily, snapping shots of the tubing visible from the window, even measuring how far the compressor sat from the outer wall. They sent a final notice warning us that non-compliant residents may be subject to mandatory compliance enforcement, a phrase so vague it felt like a threat. Their latest demand was that we relocate all medical equipment indoors or underground within 14 days to avoid further fines. I called them, explained that housing the oxygen compressor indoors would pose a fire hazard and reduce airflow, something my mother's pulmonologist explicitly forbade. They didn't care. Exceptions require board approval, Karen replied in her high-pitched, sugar-dripping voice. And we don't make exceptions for aesthetics. My mother, bless her heart, tried to take it in stride. They just don't understand, she whispered between breaths. But the stress started affecting her vitals. Her O2 levels dropped from 95 to 88 overnight, then down into the high 7s. One night, I heard her wheezing, gasping. I rushed to check her tank. The regulator had been tampered with. The pressure valve turned so low, it was barely releasing a flow. I double-CH checked the internal settings, and when I realized this wasn't a malfunction, my stomach dropped. Someone had physically adjusted the valve. I called 911. She was rushed to the ER with severe hypoxia, stabilized just in time to avoid permanent damage. While she slept under a tangle of wires and beeping monitors, I stood there shaking, not with fear, but fury. This wasn't just petty fines or HOA politics anymore. This was sabotage. This was attempted murder. The moment I got home, I went to work. I bought 6 security cameras and installed them around the property. 2 facing the front porch and yard, 1 on the garage, and the rest covering every window door, and especially the compressor unit. I added motion sensors and a Ring camera on the doorbell. Every movement outside the house would now be logged, time-stamped, and uploaded to cloud storage. I changed the locks, added a steel cover around the regulator valve, and attached a tamper evidence seal that would snap if touched. Then I began documenting everything: the violations, the appeals, the threats. I printed out every email, recorded every phone call, and created a log with photos, timestamps, and summaries. If Karen and her HOA thought they could intimidate me into silence, they had just created the wrong enemy. I wasn't going to argue or negotiate anymore. I was going to collect evidence, build my case, and prepare to return fire. Not with words, but with law, exposure, and the kind of retaliation that doesn't knock on the front door, but walks straight into the heart of what they care about most: control. What they didn't realize is that while they were busy measuring tubing, I was quietly preparing to measure their downfall. The week after my mother came home from the hospital, something in me changed. I no longer felt the need to reason or explain myself to these petty tyrants. They had escalated from fines and harassment to endangering my mother's life. I realized then I wasn't just dealing with overzealous suburban control freaks. I was dealing with people who felt untouchable, people who had been in power too long and assumed they could rewrite the rules to suit themselves. I spent every spare moment digging into Burwood Trail's HOA infrastructure, starting with their board meetings. They streamed every session on a private Vimeo link, but they never expected someone to actually watch all of them. I did every single one for the past 2 years. I downloaded the recordings, ran them through transcription software, and used keyword searches to tag mentions of landscaping, water access, maintenance contracts, and special assessments. That's when I started noticing a pattern. Almost every time Karen brought up budget issues, she pivoted to the same topic, water. More specifically, how the HOA had been forced to negotiate with a private provider after the city denied them an expansion on their municipal water usage. Curious, I filed a public records request. It took a few days, but what I got back was gold. 3 years ago, Karen had orchestrated a deal between the HOA and a privately owned water rights company called Clear Source LLC. I traced Clear Source's corporate registry, and guess whose name was listed as a silent co-owner? Leonard Frazier, Karen's brother-in-law. The address on file, a P.O. box in the same zip code as Burwood Trails. It took me all of one night to connect the dots. Karen had used HOA funds to pay her brother-in-law's company over $20,000 a year for exclusive water rights to a small aquifer located just outside of town. An aquifer that fed into the HOA sprinkler systems, decorative fountains, and community center plumbing. I drove to the county assessor's office and requested the parcel records. The well sat on a small plot of land, 1.2 acres, technically zoned for agricultural use. The ownership was transferred 3 years ago from the original farmer to Clear Source LLC. But here's the kicker. The ownership came with a lease agreement that was set to expire in exactly 60 days unless renewed. I had a friend who worked in property law help me review the fine print. The lease had a reversion clause. The rights to the well would revert to the landowner if not recontracted by the HOA or another party. I asked her point blank, if I buy the land, do I get the rights to the well? She read it 3 times and looked up at me. Yes, if you buy it before the lease renewal and file the paperwork first, the HOA will have to renegotiate with you. That night, I wired a deposit. I made the purchase through a shell company. No need for Karen to know who held her water leash until it was too late. Within 2 weeks, the deed was transferred. I became the proud owner of a dried-up pasture that just so happened to sit on a natural underground well. The water that fed the entire HOA's amenities now belonged to me. The best part, their lease was set to expire in 45 days. I let the clock tick. While I waited, I kept the appearance of normalcy. I mowed my lawn, waved to neighbors, and smiled at Karen when she passed by, clipboard in hand, pretending to write something every time she looked at my mother's compressor unit. What she didn't know was that I had cameras capturing her every move. Meanwhile, I was building something else, a legal case. I contacted a medical rights attorney named Olivia Chong, who specialized in elder abuse and ADA violations. I sent her a packet of everything. The tampered regulator, the photos, the HOA's correspondence demanding we move medical equipment, and the hospital reports showing my mother's oxygen levels prior to and following the incident. Olivia was stunned. They're digging their own grave, she said. If we can prove their actions led to a life-threatening event, we can sue not just the HOA, but the board members individually under state disability protection laws. We began assembling the lawsuit. Quietly, Olivia advised me to keep my head down. Don't antagonize them. Don't give them any reason to think I'm plotting something. But what I did do was request public information on all contracts held by Burwood Trails HOA, landscaping, waste removal, even the company that serviced their pool filters, everything. The paper trail was disgusting. Karen had a tight little circle of vendors, many of them connected to her family or longtime associates. Overcharging was rampant. The landscaping company builds $6,000 a month for seasonal flowering installations that never seemed to change. The pool maintenance company charged for bi-weekly visits even in winter when the pool was covered. I created spreadsheets, linked names, addresses, invoice dates, and cross-referenced them with company registries. The HOA was a legal cartel, and Karen was the queen pin, but the crown jewel was the water. Because what Karen didn't realize was that I had filed a new lease agreement with the HOA's management company under a different name, my shell company, and it came with a modest but crucial change. Instead of renewing their unlimited water draw, the new lease limited them to 10,000 gallons per month, about enough to water the flower beds and flush toilets in the community center. Any overage would be billed at a punitive rate. I scheduled the new agreement to take effect automatically the day their old one expired. No email notice, no alert, just a change in ownership and enforcement. It would take them a few days to realize something was wrong, and by then it would be too late. I also did one more thing. I had the well inspected, and the technician confirmed something interesting. The secondary pump, which fed the fountains and decorative streams, could be rerouted, not to poison it, but to change the mineral balance slightly. I had no intention of making people sick, but if the pH levels were just high enough, it would stain fixtures, rust pipes, and turn the water a lovely shade of yellow-brown. All perfectly legal, all traceable to a natural shift in groundwater composition. I wasn't trying to kill anyone. I was just giving them a taste of how it felt to have something essential corrupted by someone else's hand. Meanwhile, Olivia filed the initial paperwork for our lawsuit. We named the HOA and all 5 board members individually. We alleged negligence, ADA violations, targeted harassment of a vulnerable adult, and conspiracy to commit interference with medical care. We requested damages, legal fees, and a court-ordered injunction to prevent the HOA from issuing any further violations without oversight. The process was slow, but I wasn't in a hurry. I knew they were about to walk into a hell of their own making. I was the only person who knew the dam was about to break, and I had built the damn thing myself. Every time I looked at my mother, her chest rising and falling softly under the quiet hum of her oxygen machine, I was reminded of why I was doing this. Not just for her, but for every neighbor too scared to fight back. The HOA had mistaken silence for submission. They were about to find out that revenge, like water, has a way of finding every crack and flooding everything they thought was safe. It happened again. I came home from a grocery run and heard the worst sound imaginable. Silence. No soft hum from the oxygen compressor. No rhythmic puff from the valve regulator. Just dead quiet, and the faint wee of my mother struggling to breathe. I ran to the tank. The line had been disconnected. Not just knocked loose, deliberately unscrewed. The tamper evidence seal I'd installed was broken clean in half, the plastic lying in 2 pieces on the carpet. I connected it back, cranked the regulator, and watched her chest slowly rise and fall as the color crept back into her face. Once she was stable, I pulled up the camera footage. There it was, 11:42 a.m. A tall figure in a beige windbreaker ducking around the side of the house, walking directly to the compressor. They crouched, fumbled, stood, and left. 37 seconds. I zoomed in. I already knew who it was. There was only one person with that stiff little power walk. Only one person who looked both smug and panicked at once. Karen. My jaw clenched so hard I could hear the bones pop. I sent the footage to Olivia, our attorney, and waited for her response. It came 20 minutes later in all caps. This is attempted manslaughter. That's when I knew it was time. No more waiting. No more paperwork or strategy. It was time for consequences. That same afternoon, I contacted the new water systems technician we'd contracted through my shell company. I gave him the green light to switch the HOA's water intake to the backup well, a legal secondary source located on the same property as the original, but far deeper with higher mineral content and a rich presence of naturally occurring sulfur. Perfectly safe, perfectly legal, but the taste, the smell, revolting. The HOA wouldn't even be notified because under the new lease, which they had failed to read in detail, the service provider retained control of distribution methods so long as safety standards were met. That evening, as I made dinner, I could already see the first results. A message on the HOA's neighborhood app. Anyone else's water smelling like rotten eggs? The comments piled up in real time. Our dishwasher smells weird. Why is our laundry turning yellow? Why does the water taste like metal and farts? I sat there spooning soup into a bowl for my mom, quietly smiling. The timing couldn't have been better. The HOA board had scheduled a community meeting for that weekend. What they didn't know was that Olivia had arranged for a court official to serve them with legal documents at that very meeting. Oh, and the local news. I had tipped them off anonymously, attaching footage of Karen tampering with my mother's oxygen supply. The headline practically wrote itself. Oh, president accused of endangering disabled senior caught on camera. When Saturday rolled around, I was ready. I printed every violation, every photo, every invoice showing Karen's personal ties to the vendors. I uploaded the footage of the sabotage to a private YouTube link and queued it to the perfect timestamp. I charged my iPad, wore a suit, and arrived early, taking a seat near the front with Olivia at my side. The community center smelled like bleach and burned toast, a scent that clung to the water supply and drifted out of every faucet and fountain. Residents filled the room quickly, whispering and complaining. You could see the discomfort in their faces, the confusion in their eyes. A young mother fanned her baby's face with a flyer. A man muttered about how his shower had smelled like eggs and nickels. Karen walked in 5 minutes late, flanked by 2 other board members. She looked haggard, eyes ringed with stress, lips tight. She saw me, froze for half a beat, then forced a brittle smile, and continued to the podium. Good afternoon, neighbors, she began. We're aware of the current water irregularities, and we're working closely with our provider, too. Actually, I said, standing. I'd like to clarify that point. Karen blinked. Excuse me? I turned to face the crowd. As of 36 days ago, the water provider for Birchwood Trails was changed. That change occurred because the land and well that feed your water supply were purchased by a company I own. I am your provider now. Murmurs exploded across the room. Karen opened her mouth, but I raised my iPad. This is footage from last week. Please pay attention to the timestamp and to what this woman does. I tapped play. The footage projected onto the community center screen. The board had installed it last year using HOA funds, which felt like sweet irony. The room watched in stunned silence as Karen crept into my yard, knelt beside my mother's oxygen compressor, and unscrewed the regulator valve. The video ended with her standing and walking away. A gasp rippled through the crowd. A man stood up. Is that real? I nodded. It is. The tamper evidence seal was broken. My mother was hospitalized that night. Olivia stepped forward. We have filed a civil suit against Karen Harding as well as the HOA board for systemic harassment, ADA violations, and criminal negligence. Another voice shouted from the back. Wait, isn't that Karen's brother-in-law who owns the water company? I smiled. Used to? I bought it because I got tired of waiting for justice. 2 officers entered the room. The crowd parted. Karen's eyes widened. She whispered something to the board member beside her, but it was too late. One of the officers approached the podium. Karen Harding, we have a warrant for your arrest on suspicion of criminal tampering with life-sustaining medical equipment. The room exploded. Cameras flashed. Yes, the press had arrived. I had emailed them the moment the officers confirmed the arrest time. The coverage aired that night, leading the news in 3 counties. The board was dismantled within a week. Emergency elections were held. Karen resigned from all public activity pending trial. The footage went viral online, shared by advocacy groups, disability rights organizations, and HOA watchdogs across the country. Olivia's phone rang nonstop with calls from reporters and lawyers. The court approved a preliminary injunction preventing the HOA from issuing fines without independent oversight. As for the water, I kept it running for 2 more weeks, just long enough for them to beg. Then I offered them a new contract, reasonable rates, clean water, and 0 tolerance for corruption. They signed it with trembling hands. And the final piece, that same HOA community center Karen loved so much, the one they had used to file violations, hold meetings, and plan their little power games, was sold through a loophole Olivia found to a nonprofit that converted it into a rehab shelter for vulnerable seniors and at-risk mothers. It now runs on water I supply, maintained by a crew I trained, powered by solar panels I installed. They tried to poison my mother's air. I poisoned their kingdom. Now my mother's garden blooms in our front yard. Her oxygen tank sits peacefully beside her rocking chair, untouched and safe. And every morning as we sip coffee on the porch and watch butterflies drift through the flowers, I remember silence is never surrender. Sometimes it's just the sound of water gathering behind a dam, waiting to break. If you think an HOA is just a bunch of folks trimming hedges and politely reminding you about lawn care, you just got a serious wake-up call. This wasn't just a masterclass in revenge, it was a warning. Never let anyone take away your rights, your dignity, or your life just because you stayed quiet. Magnifying glass tilted left lessons to take away. Read every document before you sign. A rushed signature can cost you months, even years, of stress. Keep every piece of evidence. Emails, invoices, photos, call recordings, receipts are power. The HOA may have authority, but you have the law on your side. Know your property, boundaries, rights, and legal protections. Silence isn't weakness. Sometimes silence is a strategy waiting for the right moment. Balance scale, and most importantly, justice doesn't always scream. Sometimes it arrives as a court order, a letter from a lawyer, or a moment where the people who hurt you finally face real consequences. Fire if you've ever been bullied, threatened, or dismissed. Remember, you can absolutely fight back, not with rage, but with law, planning, and persistence. And when done right, you won't just win, you'll tear down the entire corrupt system. Movie camera love stories where justice speaks louder than power. Hit that subscribe button, drop a comment with your experience, and remember, never underestimate the quiet neighbor. They might just be rewriting the rules.